Hey, world, I'm live again. I know nobody knows who I am. I'm never here, but that's okay. Um, so I keep getting these notifications. They're driving me nuts. There's errors apparently somewhere. Um, Obviously, we're a little bit more professional today. Kelly's back, uh, and we are not winging it as much. Kelly's here. So today we have a special show, and it is a dear friend of mine, Sage. Sage Breslin is a really dear friend of mine, and we are going to talk about having a PhD versus spirituality because I think it's a tremendous misconception that if you are highly educated, I don't want to say overly, I didn't want to say too much, but if you're highly educated, that you can't be spiritual at the same time. Um, I think that is an enormous misconception. I think that the reality is what I've learned from my life being undereducated is the more spiritual I get, the more tapped into universal knowledge I am, and the more connected and deeper I understand even what I never learned. Um, so, Sage, why don't you give a little bit of an intro about yourself for those that don't know you, and then we'll get people to find you and know you because there's a lot of good people out there that could use Sage's help. There is no doubt.
Well, thanks. That question, oh, just tell me a little bit about yourself. I always shudder, when people ask that because people who know me also shudder like, oh my, okay, where do you start? What do you possibly say in 4 or 5 seconds that would even come remotely close to the kind of life that I've lived? I think what I would say about myself is, I grew up as a master of disguise because what was happening behind the curtain was pretty awful. And yet I was raised in a very lovely family, but a family that, favored making it look right and doing it right and, checking the boxes. And so I think that maybe internally I just knew or thought I knew, honestly, that if they knew what was going on, that I wouldn't be accepted or I would be cast out. And I certainly felt that way about, my relationship with God. As more and more horrific things happened to me, I felt more and more disenfranchised because of the shame. Like I just didn't think that there was any way for me to remain sort of in that embrace given what had happened to me. And it wasn't until, things really hit the fan and I gave up. Probably when I think about, it's either the worst night of my life or one of the top three, I couldn't do it. I couldn't go on any longer. And I made a really solid attempt to end my life. And I was clinically dead for 22 minutes. And, unfortunately, that's never a good thing. And fortunately for me, I crossed through that veil and I met my version of God. And everything kind of came into full clarity for me. And I was allowed to return. And when I returned, it was like being, on crack because everything was heightened and intense. And while I wouldn't recommend flatlining for anyone, it certainly delivered a life lesson and a transformation for me that altered the course of my life and completely altered how I live, how I do my business, how I conduct myself, just how I live in the world. I'd love to say that was the only time I flatlined, but I flatlined 8 more times, and I'm now on my 9th life. So again, I wouldn't recommend it, but it has enhanced my spirituality and my connection with the divine, not the other way around. And I agree with what you said. I think that it opened me to really just accessing universal knowledge and wisdom. And, there are, going to ask my teachers in high school, we made an agreement if I could pass the final on the first day, I didn't have to go. And, so I just cheated by clicking into that universal wisdom and just asking for the answers. And it pushed my buttons a little bit later on in life when I really needed that knowledge, but at the time.
Well, as you know, I'm one of the few people that's probably been clinically dead more than you. And I didn't share the same experience. They kind of forced me to come back. I didn't want to, any of the times actually. I had a death wish. And I refused universal knowledge each of those times on top of it because I had no interest. I'm just stubborn in every way possible. So, why not on that side too? Maybe I just knew what was coming and I didn't want to deal with it, right? So, but at the end of the day, I really want to go deeper into a few of the circumstances that you went through because I think that it might not be 100% relevant to the topic, but I think people can relate, especially where today's world is with
Sure.
that. So why don't you share a few of your experiences? And I think it's cheating if I start bringing out which ones. I'd rather you just follow your intuition because I don't want to push something that you don't want to share. So,
Well, I am probably unlike other therapists, especially analytically trained therapists. I'm an open book, so and there's a lot of my story that's available publicly. I've written, a tremendous amount about what my experiences have been. If there's one in particular that is circling around for you, I'm happy to speak to that.
I was thinking about the sex trafficking ring because that is very relevant for today, like beyond relevant. And I think people don't realize the severity or the how real it is because
Mhm.
it doesn't affect them directly. Then it's something easy to sweep under the rug because nobody wants to think about it, right?
Sure, sure.
So
Yeah,
why don't
I'm happy to.
yeah, talk about that one a little bit because I think that's something that can help others in a large way.
Mhm. Sure, sure. Well, there's probably no easy way to describe it. I think that people who are really good at this are so fantastic at grooming that young people don't even know when it's happening. That's kind of the real key here is that, when we're teenagers, we really feel like we know what's up and that we are not missing the cues and we know how to take care of ourselves. And I was definitely one of those people. I really felt that, even, intuitively, I was, on par and watching. And, but, my first real boyfriend was at 14. And when he went away to college, I was very lonely and I felt, in a way rejected. And, so there I am, almost 15, and I've kind of lost my posse, my group, because he was a senior, I was a freshman, and so my friends were all seniors. So of course, my friends all left at the same time, as well as with the boyfriend. And I had a few friends left, and I tried my best to go out and do things and hang out. And unfortunately, I think that predators can see isolation, they can see singularity, and I was a target. And at 15, I was targeted by a local cartel. I had no idea. I actually believed this older guy was my boyfriend. I thought he was interested in me. Of course, if there had been any right mind there, the 15-year-old self would say, okay, a 20-something is not interested in you. He's going to be interested in women his own age. But at 15, that's not how we think. And it was not right away, as I said, that I understood what was happening. I slowly but surely learned, that he had friends who were hooked up. I saw drugs. The one place that we went consistently, two places, I kept noticing things that didn't seem right to me, but I didn't know to question them. And at the end of that year, I'm trying to think, it was almost 2 years. I I was thinking about the timing. It was a year later. I had seen a lot of drugs. We consistently went to a Mexican restaurant where the same routine would happen every time. So I'd sit down, they'd take our order, always the same guy, and then this guy would excuse himself to go to the restroom. And even as a 15-year-old, they consistently served me alcohol. We rarely ate much. And, then he wanted his needs met. And I didn't realize until later that that was an exchange place. And it was much later. But on the night in question that I referred to earlier, I was at a party and I was, trying to do the thing of being, the big man's girlfriend and hostessing and smile on my face. And I wasn't much of a drinker, just because it affected me so quickly. And I was meeting somebody that he was introducing me to. And the next thing I knew, they were having a conversation about my value. And when I say value, I mean what my price tag was. And I remember, I think, kind of going out of body because I'd had other kind of traumatic experiences. And I remember not wanting to be in my body anymore and hearing the sale going on. And for the life of me, I couldn't climb back into my body. I just thought, this isn't happening to me. This isn't, what is this? And, my boyfriend started walking away and the other guy called out to him and called out for a bottle of tequila. And probably the most salient memory I have is the sound of that bottle hurtling through the air and hitting his palm as he grabbed it. And, he proceeded to put it down my throat. And until I blacked out, I have spotty memories of being pretty savagely raped in one of the bedrooms at that location. And then I came to, and I was on my parents' lawn. And I was disheveled and my clothes were inside out and torn. And I remember thinking, how did I get here? Where am I? And I just kept looking and thinking, no, I know where I am. And then I was having memories of what had happened. And I think it was at that point in time I started to realize, things started to go all in order. And I thought, oh my God. And it was that point in time where I went in and swallowed a bottle of pills and laid down to die. And I thought that I got up and threw up and then drove to the church and talked to a minister. I mean, it's probably 1:00 in the morning, mind you, and you couldn't take all of those benzos and actually drive a vehicle. That would be impossible, even if you threw up most of what you. And so, I didn't even realize that until later. And when I came to, I realized, that there were other things that were in motion. I was pregnant at the time, and just days later, I lost the pregnancy as a result of what happened. And that was difficult because that was one of the only things I felt that was mine. And yet, in order to really exit, I couldn't have been, pregnant. They just would never have let me leave. And there were attempts to reconnect with me and, to pick me back up. But at this point in time, I was damaged. And I went underground. I couldn't be happier to say that, it was not long after that there was a huge police raid on one of their drug deals, and almost all of them ended up in prison. Unfortunately, the right-hand man who was posing as my boyfriend, fled to another state. And to this day, I think he's still out and about. A couple of years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I actually saw the buyer, and I happened to be up at the belly up, and I saw him, and he's very remarkable in size and stature and the way he looks. And I just happened to be with a friend listening to music, and he passed in front of me. It was dark, right? Thank God. And I started to shake, and I just told her, we've got to get out of here. And nobody had ever heard this part of the story. And, she got me home, and she just said, do you want me to call the police? Do you want, and I just remember thinking, I don't ever want to be connected to these people ever again. Like, I was scared, but I was even more scared to open it back up.
So-
when I look at all of that, the other thing I can say is I have a dear friend. I've known him for 46 years. And because I went to a small school. And when I finally came clean and told that friend 3 years ago about what had happened, he said, how is that possible? I was there. And I said, you've now said what at least 50 people have said, would say in response. Yeah, you all were right there and had no idea. And it happens all the time. And sex trafficking isn't new. I mean, the cartels use women as party favors, use girls as party favors. Yes, we do have a, sex slave trade where it's just bodies. They don't want you for any other reason. They want bodies. In the cartels, they want the bodies, but they're using them to appease or please their buyers.
I guess I'm not really sure where to go from here. That kind of that took a direction.
Mic drop.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't get shocked very easy, and I know I've heard the story from you, right? We've talked about this actually at length, I think, our first conversation. And it's so real. I feel it, right? Like, I feel the pain, and I feel I'm a tremendous empath. All right, so I feel it globally going on right now, right? And I just the fear that it instills in these girls, and the sociopathic tendencies of these men scares the shit out of me that I'm raising two girls in this world, right? It's scary, right? And a close friend of mine, actually, her daughter got catfished by somebody in sex trafficking over the weekend, in Florida, and it scares the crap out of me. I mean, the guy came through Roblox to meet her.
Yeah.
Like, it's scary. I mean, they know what they're doing, right? And I know that
And it's not just men, there are a lot of
Oh.
women that are in charge of these rings.
I know, and that's it. It's mind-boggling to me, right? Like, the whole system, the whole way that it works, and I think that's why the path that we're on of enlightenment is so important, because it's time.
Well, and raising conscious children. I mean, I have 5, and
Yeah.
I think I tried to do my best, with the first 2, and now the last 3 are 3 teenage boys. And, for years and years and years, I kept this from them. And, we were happened to be in Sedona one day, and they were making off-color, what they thought were jokes. And I came apart on a trail, and I sat them down on the trail and said, you want to hear this story? You want to hear why your words are cruel and unjust and cannot be repeated. And they just about lost their squash on the trail. And, since then, and they don't know every detail, but since then they have been more cautious. And even when they say something stupid to their friends, they tend to backtrack pretty quickly to say, actually, that's not funny. But raising conscious children is where it starts. And if our children can then impact other kids around them, hopefully we create a consciousness, and an intuitively driven consciousness that they will be not just more careful, but more cognizant of
What's going on around them.
what's going on around them. Yeah.
Just like your friends, right? They all said they had no idea what was going on. I mean, that's how easy it is, right? And I had a girlfriend when I was younger who actually was involved in that when I met her. And I helped her get away from it. Now, granted, that's, probably 2 of the 13 times I've had those experiences of near death. Death, but not, right? Because they won't let me leave anyway.
Right.
But that was at least 2 of them, but I wasn't going to let it happen, right? And, at the time, I remember I was 18 years old, like 19 years old, and I went into this room and I met with these guys that I should have never been meeting. I literally told them that if you don't stop, I will literally become everything I'm supposed to become right now, and I will end this. Like, this is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And it ended up happening on its own naturally from that point forward, that it unraveled very quickly. But it was really bad. Like, it was her own blood uncle that did it to her, right?
Yeah.
Like, own blood. Like, her father put her up for adoption, and
Wow.
her blood uncle found her. Like, I mean, that's how sick and twisted it was. And this is way off our topic, but I think this is important also, right? And this is part of it. Talk a little bit about why you went into psychology, therapy, PhD, why you went that direction, because I think that's also important, because intuitive nature obviously separates you from the majority of people in this world as of today, right? And the hope is that 10 years from now, it's a norm, right? But talk a little bit more about at what point you figured that going into psychology or that area, right, brain science, let's say, was the right path for you.
Well, I think there are kind of, 2 paths that dovetailed for me. One was that I was aware of how underserved I was. I was aware that I needed help. I tried to the extent that I could to get it, like through school programs, but it never occurred to me that I could disclose all of this incredibly shameful experience to my parents or even my grandparents. I just didn't think that that was possible. And so, normal avenues for therapy were delayed until I was an adult and I could afford to get that on my own. But there was in the background this urge, like I'd like to give something that I so desperately need. I'd like to be that person. So that was kind of in the background. And then, for me, I was actually headed to medical school. And very early on in college, I had a terrible car accident and I suffered a brain injury. And I lost all, the damage to my frontal lobe knocked out all of my math and physics. And I remember sitting with the dean after the accident and just thinking, like, what the hell do I do now? I've put all my eggs in this basket of going to medical school. And he just said, well, let's think about other big picture sciences. And he said, what about people? What about psychology? It's kind of the same thing. And he said, you can get into grad school. That's not going to be a problem for you. And I remember thinking, is that really what I want? And it was then that I started kind of attending to that other path that had been sitting in the background saying, you could help, you could help other people like you. And, then I got real motivated to start really getting some therapy and unpacking all of my trauma and my drama. And so by the time I was in graduate school, more, of course, going to graduate school may require you to go into therapy anyway. So, I became an avid consumer. And I think that as I began to treat other people, I began to see where the broken places still were. And so I invested in a lot of experiential therapies as well, because for me, the experiences were so visceral. So that was really important to me. So I mean, I've done lots and lots and lots of traditional therapy, but I've also, I worked 10 years in shamanic training and work as a shaman. And, so for me, all of that work was probably more productive at the end when I really needed that soul retrieval, when I needed to find, the rest of me that I'd cast aside. And, thinking about that day where I just stepped out of my body, I needed to go back and collect it, and bring it back with me to say like, okay, I got to get closer to being a whole being here. And I noticed a huge change for me in terms of my ability to work with and treat other people. The more work I did on myself, the more tuned up I was, the more intuitive I was, and the more, accurate I could be with other people.
So where does go a little bit into your background on the connectedness, spirituality side? We can call it connectedness if that makes people more comfortable, whatever you want to call it, right?
Sure.
Like, I want to talk a little, because you've been very successful in that as well. And you've done many things in that. So I want to go into that side of it a little bit, because I want people to understand the depth that you went on that side. And then we can take it back around to this side again. But I think both sides share.
Well, I was born clairvoyant. I think I'm genetically from one of those families. My brother's telekinetic. My mom is clairsentient. So, but I didn't know. I mean, I knew my brother's telekinetic. It was like a great party trick to watch. And I knew that I was different than other kids. I did a lot of poking when I was little because I couldn't tell the difference between a etheric body and a physical body. Which I'm sure had something to do with, my not playing well with others initially. Until I found my own people. I play well with you people. So, I knew that I had access to something beyond what other people did. But really, I was kind of told to put it away. My grandmother on my dad's side, one day I asked her, we were sitting in the living room, and I asked her about this man. I thought he was a ranch hand because they lived on a ranch. And I said, why does he keep on going back and forth from, your closet to my bedroom? And she just looked at me and she said, don't ever mention that again. And I mean, I think she could also see and experience it, but I think she just was like, no, we don't do that in our family. And it wasn't until my first job at 17 was with NASA, and I was working in a spectrometry lab, and so very scientific and evidence-based. And I was waiting at the machine for one of the materials to generate a graph, and I saw the graph before it came out of the machine. And I remember thinking, like, what is wrong with me? Like, am I sick? And then it came out, and I looked and I thought, oh my God, did that just happen? And it happened a few more times. And I thought, this thing's not gone. Like, I gotta think about this. And, I mean, I had plenty of experiences along the way that kept on kind of feeding in. And it wasn't until after my daughter and my son were born that I got a really bizarre introduction to an emotional intuitive who insisted that I come and have a sample session. And during the course of the session, she showed me who I was. And it scared the living daylights out of me. And I ended up doing 3 years of study with her and another year and a half with another trained master. And it helped me give me some controls on my ability to use that. I worked for one of Carolyn Mace's people as a medical intuitive for a couple of years. And then I actually worked with a wide variety of protective services people, including, police in various states, FBI, CIA, and I found bodies. And I guess for what it's worth, I'm pretty accurate. And one of the last ones, I was called by the family, a friend of the family, and her son, who was on a year abroad, was missing. And the FBI had become involved, and Interpol, and she asked me to tell the location if I could. And, I was able to find it within 10 feet. And, I think they were scared that I was so accurate, but I was also not connected directly to the family, out of the country, and the tracking had been perfect with this other person. It's a terrible gift in that way. It feels like a curse because you always want to make sure that body's live when you find it. But unfortunately, for me, I guess 3 times it's been live and twice dead. And I'm happy to help the families no matter what. I would rather them know rather than not know. But it's hard. It's hard. And, sometimes people work with me and they say, well, how accurate could you really be? And my answer is kind of like within 10 feet. So I went on after those experiences, and I did 10 years of, shamanic training, and it's just part of who I am. It's just another tool in my toolkit. It's, I would say it's the very foundation of how I do what I do. And breakthrough work, is largely an investigative process below the surface. And if you can have, intuition about it, it's much easier.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the way that I describe myself is I am me, right? So that encompasses everything I am. I can't explain what I do, right? I just can't. I mean, I do many different things. I can do many different things. I'm sure there's more that I could do that I haven't even figured out yet, right? And I'm just not there yet. And it will be revealed when the time's right. For me, I'm just me. Like, when I help people and they say you're this, you're that, and I'm like, just me. I'm me. That's the only description I have, right? It also keeps me grounded and away from ego because over the course of my life and many other lives, ego's easy to fall into, right? So for me, it's a healthy, almost healthy disconnect from what I can do. But like, I think people need to understand that being highly intelligent, being highly gifted, being highly educated, um, it's possible to be all of it, right? It's possible to be
Oh, yeah.
anything you want is possible. And as science is getting more evolved, science is proving it out to be true, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is science didn't catch up to this side yet. And now it's starting to, right? Because the scientific data is there, rife healing, all these other healing things,
Yeah.
and trust me, that doesn't make Big Pharma happy, but I don't care about making them happy anyway. I think there's many ways that people need to understand how this all intertwines. Talk a little bit about the retreats and stuff you did, because I think that's important too, because if traveling ever does open again, or if the US dollar still exists by then, that we have a currency we can use, I think it's important that people understand how those work, because I
Mm-hmm.
think you can look at it and say, oh, that's foo-foo, that's pie in the sky, fluffy.
Mm-hmm.
What do you explain that a little bit so that people can
Sure.
grasp?
My retreats have always been what I considered intensives. So while I am a fan of going to a spa for a few days and just regenerating, that isn't what I do when I take people on retreat. I've had groups as small as 5 and groups as large as 26. And the size to me is just who comes, who all gathers together. What is that magnetic attraction of people that need to be sharing that same space at the same time? I always tell people, that you can come in for therapy and do that 45-minute hour, but it's really hard to reconstitute yourself and go back to work or go back to your family or your relationship or just go away from the therapy. And sometimes the work that we need to do, it requires space, and it requires that space be held by other like-minded people who are capable of not only ensuring that you can dive down that bunny hole, but that you can get back. And so in that way, I've seen myself as a guide, and I think that other participants then are encouraged and instructed about how to hold space for others that are working, and it just trades off and trades off. I like to use energetic hotspots because that makes my work easier. It pops the bubble a lot easier. So I spent 10 years working in Teotihuacan, which is just 35 kilometers outside of Mexico City. It is a mystery school. It's a universe city. It's about 4,000 years old, and the ruins are, rock that is alive. Teotihuacan is one of the only places that is actually a map or a blueprint for how to unfold and rebirth. So it's really interesting. You can follow along through the pyramids over a period of days, doing ritual, doing activities, and end up at the top of the sun, the Pyramid of the Sun, rebirthing who you are. And I've never had an experience where people didn't have life-altering transformations. That's a very root chakra place. So I have to let people know when they go there, most of them don't sleep and they just feel sort of like jazzed all the time. Sometimes when I want to do heart-centered work, I actually use elk in California. It's about 10 miles south of Mendocino. It is smack dab in the middle of a pathway that the Pomo Indians used to use for their healing. And in Elk itself, the river runs down into the sea, and they considered it sacred healing ground. And so their most sacred rituals were performed right there in Elk, believe it or not. And so I love to go there because people get out of the car after, what can be a long drive. And all of a sudden, maybe within 2 or 3 breaths, you're like, wow, it's really nice here. And they just, everything sort of just drops in because it's a heart chakra place. And so, when we go to Teo, everything's like Disneyland. And when we go to Elk, it's like, la, 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 la. I think Sedona's energy it's very masculine, but it's kind of in between. It doesn't keep you up all night, but it can be very disturbing, which is not a bad thing, right? It shakes things up when you get there. Mount Shasta has a different energy to it. So most recently was in Tahiti and went into the inactive volcano there, and wow, got a surprise of my life. I didn't realize it was coming, and the next thing I knew, I was coming apart at the seams, and ended up writing most of part 1 of my memoir, which included the story I told you. So, I think wherever we go, we want to know that people are there to do their work, to dive deep below the surface, to look for things that are standing in their way. And, if they are interested in soul retrieval, if they feel like they've been through something and they've processed that something, but they still don't quite feel like themselves, sometimes it's, returning to the scene of the crime to pick up the bits and pieces and bring them back.
Which nobody wants to do, right? Like you just don't want to go there. And I've been, that's been thrown in my face a few times now. But because I'm really stubborn again, I'm beyond stubborn. So they keep driving that point home. What I'm curious is, what do you find to be the most tied place to feminine energy? Because as we're moving into the feminine dominant right now, I think that that's something that people should at least acknowledge and understand. Not that they know what that means, but they should at least understand it.
Well, strangely, elk is one of the strongest feminine vibrations I've ever experienced. I think that there are other people that might say that India has a very deeply and divine feminine center. For me, 8 times flatlining. Unfortunately, I am really sensitive to being around big crowds. The vibration is just like, I want to just kind of go like this the whole time. So India probably isn't my first choice to go and lead a retreat. So I tend to go to more remote places where there's just more space around, more space to tap into the energy. But I also think people have to, have to poke around and see what suits them as well. Just because that area speaks to me wholeheartedly, I'm sure there are people that just don't ever want to leave Mount Shasta once they've been. So it just, and then I have other participants who've been to Teo 10, 20 times, and they even have places that they stay consistently and and want to spend time there, every year. And so it just kind of depends on what suits you and your energy field.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got a unique signature, right? And I think a lot of times we speak in generalities, like general, whatever. We speak in general terms. But everybody's unique, right? And everybody has a unique foundation for where they're from, everything, all that fun stuff. That we can get as far out there as we want, right? It's a deep rabbit hole. But I don't think people understand that they have their own places, right? They have their own um they have their own energy core that they can ground the best with and that they can seek that with. When I first got where I am, I never would have expected what's happened. I never expected to still be here, but that's a different story. But apparently, I'm still here for a reason, right? Stubborn about dying, so I'm going to be stubborn about living, apparently. Um, but I'm coming out of being here different than I ever expected, right? And the evolution and transformation, life journey, whatever you want to call it, whatever word you want to use that makes you comfortable, that I've experienced here, I don't think it could have happened anywhere else, right? Like I'm in a remote area, at least remote for me, right? There's 75 people in town, which is remote for me. Hour and a half from Starbucks, that's remote for me. But I'm also surrounded by water, and I'm in a very natured area. So it's a very grounded place, which now based because of my energy, and this sounds egotistical and probably humanistic, but it's now holy for me because I've consecrated the lamp of being here and finding myself and everything else. I don't think I'll ever want to come back, but but
I've had that experience before.
Right, but you never know, right? And the reality is you don't have to be somewhere to find yourself. You don't have to be somewhere to look. You don't have to go on a retreat to find or seek. Yes, it helps because of what you create. Specifically you when you do your retreats, right? It's because of what you create around them and who gets magnetized and drawn to them, right? It's not like you're bringing together 26 people that all say, I don't want to be here, but this seemed
Right.
cool. Like, we're the jet skis, right? That's not what this is about. This isn't, you know, it's I'm trying to think like it's more than that, right? This is the holding space thing is so important. And you, as a leader of these retreats, you've had to basically have a sense for who's coming and why. And you also had to know who you're bringing together and for why. Um, these things are very calculated. It's not as much about making the money. The money exists. It's a currency. It exists. It flows. It's it has evil ways. It has spiritual ways. It has love in it. It has hate in it. Right. The sex traffickers definitely have the hate, but meanwhile, Mother Teresa had the love. So there's both extremes, and it takes somebody to transmute that into love, right? And how do you take that negativity and flip it into positivity? Where do you, when you sit with a client, as a psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist, I'm not labeling because I don't remember which one you are, but we'll just say
Psychologist.
there you go. So, and I don't really know the difference. I don't think psychiatrists can prescribe medication. Psychologists, I don't think, right? Okay. I've never had good experiences with any, so I'm not going to go there.
Except for me.
Yes, except for you, actually. I adore you. Um, yeah, actually, we've had great conversations. Um, but where do you bring your spirituality into those sessions? Because at some point it does come up, right? Because that's naturally who
Yeah.
you are. So it comes into it. So how do you bring the spiritual into the physical?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually a question that has been posed by many therapists just in chats and forums and workshops, which is, if you have a faith or if you have a belief system, do you keep it out of the room or do you bring it in? And I remember when I was not out, right? And I did traditional therapy, and I always knew that there was more. I knew that I could be more helpful, more effective. But I was afraid. I use the word God to reference my connection with the divine. I think it's a great acronym. I think it can mean something different for every single human. And to me, it's so much easier to be able to simply, my reference, bring God into the room than to try to implement a way to keep that divine energy out. So I understood kind of why, Freud wanted this blank slate. I get all that. But I did 25 years as a trauma psychologist. So I will tell you, the people that I've seen throughout, the last 30 years, if I don't show up in my full personhood and my full humanity, they will, just maybe not even make it through a full session and be like, yeah, I don't need you. But if I show up fully, if I am myself, faith, insight, spirituality, and all, they'll come back because they can feel my authenticity. They can feel who I am. They don't mind it. It's very rare for people to land with me that just can't relate or don't like the way I do things. Every once in a blue moon, I get an atheist client, which is really interesting for me. And I maybe just do a lot to find out why they believe that there is no God. And because it's a lot easier if you can plug into a big old power source than trying to burn out by using just your own. But if that's who they are, if we get to the end of a series of long conversations about that, and they're still just very convinced that there is no God, there is no divine, it's all just, luck or something, that's fine too. Like, I'll do the work with their human, and that's where we'll be. But for me, I know how much more effective I can be when I'm just myself. And my relationship with the divine is at the very core of who I am. I'm only on this planet because of God's grace, like literally. I look back at a moment in time where I, as a human, made a decision and God said, no, I got stuff for you to do.
Again, stubborn. I tested that a few times.
Yeah.
So I think I just thought of this, right? And I know you have to leave, so we're gonna end in a couple minutes, but we're gonna do a roundtable with a few different spiritual leaders that I know, and I want to talk about religion versus spirituality, because that's another
Very different.
but it's also another misconception that you can't be both, right? And it's also it also is a stigma, and it's also a topic that I think shies people away from living into themselves fully. And I think it's time to have a round table about it. And
Yeah, I'd love that.
definitely have a group of people that could do it. I know that. That's a given. So you're coming back for that 100%. You're definitely
Okay.
coming. You don't have
Excellent.
you are. Um and I'm sure you'll come back again because I love talking to you. And apparently I'm so busy. This is the only way we get to talk these days. So it's just one of those
Probably.
things. It's, 3 kids and just doing the best I can with time. My dad text messaged me stuff that doesn't exist just to see if I respond. Like, it's almost like sending out, the bat signal. Are you still there? Like, yeah, I'm just trying to work, I'm trying to do my podcast, trying to do everything I'm doing, right? Shows and be
Right.
my best self and be there for my 3 kids. And he's like, you don't have time to text. And I'm like, I don't have time to breathe. I don't know what you're talking about. I spent Super Bowl Sunday not watching the Super Bowl, writing instead, which I actually enjoyed. And then I also was just with the kids. I didn't even watch the Super Bowl. I didn't watch the game. I didn't care. It just doesn't matter anymore. It's trivial to me. It used to be my out from life. I don't need an out. I kind of like my life. I'm kind of happy who I am. I don't need to look for those outs anymore. It just doesn't matter to me. So I thank you so much. And do you want to share your website just so people can find you? And
Oh, sure. It's just my name. So it's sagebreslin.com.
sounds
And it should be easy to find me. I have a second website called comeandwalkwithme.com for people who really are looking for out of the office experiences and who maybe just don't, the traditional space is uncomfortable for some reason. You can get to that from sagebreslin.com, but sometimes people find me that way as well. And I have a membership site coming out, oh gosh, any day, where they were trying to do some final twists and dials. So,
well, I appreciate you. This didn't stream on LinkedIn. We had tech issues, no surprise. And
Mercury is in retrograde, so
yeah, so anything's possible. But I will repost a YouTube link because I think this is something that people need to watch and people need to see and people need to understand. And I appreciate you so much. Thank you for your time.
and you. Absolutely. My pleasure as always.
Love our conversations.
You too.